Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing my April reading recap. So we are just going to jump in. I'm going to go through all the books that I read during the month of April, let you know my thoughts, my rating, all that good stuff. So let's just get started. And if you are caught up on all my other videos, some of these might feel repetitive because I did videos that featured these books and I talked more at length about them. So for those, I will probably skip through a little quicker. First one this applies to, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Now, this book, and also all the books minus one, I read on my Kindle, so I don't have physical copies of them, just so you know. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It is the first book by Holly Jackson that I have ever read, and I did really enjoy it. It is a young adult murder mystery type of situation, so it's about Pip, and she is completing a capstone senior project on a murder that took place in her town years ago, and she's kind of reinvestigating it because she feels like the person who was charged or assumed to have done the murder is actually innocent, so she's trying to figure out who actually did it. This reminded me, and I don't remember if I said this in my video or not, but it reminded me so much of Riverdale in the sense that it's like this band of teenagers that are like running around doing all this crazy shit, and like you're finding out all these twists and turns, and there's a lot of suspense and a lot of twists in this book. And it was funny because Pip and Robbie just reminded me so much of, I don't remember their character names because I stopped watching Riverdale a long time ago, but Cole Sprouse and Lily Reinhart in Riverdale, that's what it reminded me of, just the vibes, because it was very much like they're just running this town and figuring things out. I don't know, that's just what my brain associated it with. I did really like Robbie and Pip both. Our main character is Pip. Robbie's kind of like a secondary character, but I really enjoyed their banter, their like relationship that kind of formed over the course of the book. And I think that Pip was a really relatable character, even as an adult. Like, I was able to reflect back on my teenage years and how I was feeling during that time, and honestly even now sometimes, because I don't feel like I'm a 26-year-old woman. Like, there's just no way that's real. So I really connected a lot with her character. There were bits and pieces of this story where I felt like I was kind of bored. Like, I wanted to keep reading, but I wanted to keep reading just to get the answers and be done. So I was just like kind of like skimming, or found myself getting really just impatient with what I was reading at the time. It was an easy read. It wasn't too scary even for someone like me. So I would recommend this, especially if you like thrillers but you're a little paranoid. The next book I read was actually a reread, and that is A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And I gave this one a 4.5 rating, and I believe that's what I gave it the last time as well. Back then I rated it on a scale of 1 to 10 versus 1 to 5, so it was kind of hard to equate the two, but I think this first book I gave a 7 out of 10, which I feel like is pretty comparable to a 4 out of 5. It was so enjoyable getting back into this series. I was able to annotate my book, my physical copy, and I used like all the different pens, and there's so many things in the book that I picked up on that I didn't the first time around, and there were so many things that tied it to other Sarah J. Maas books that I was like, oh my gosh. And I will say, the order that I read her series is in is A Court of Thorn and Roses, Throne of Glass, and then Crescent City, and I really, really enjoyed reading it that way. I don't know if anyone recommends reading it a different way, but I feel like A Court of Thorn and Roses is a perfect like little dip your toe in, and then once you have that feel for Sarah J. Maas writing and you get like the bug, then Throne of Glass is a really good, like, less spicy version, but so much world building and so many characters that you fall in love with. And then Crescent City is like all of that mashed into another series. I feel like too, I have a really hard time, whether it's books, movies, TV shows, if it's super intricate and it requires a lot of thinking and remembering and people's names and places and all of this stuff, I have a really hard time grasping that. Like Game of Thrones, I've watched one time through, and I couldn't tell you a lot of the shit that happens in that show. I enjoyed it, and like once you start talking about it, I'm like, oh yes, and then this happens, and it like I can jog my memory in that way. But while I'm watching it, like, or reading it or whatever, it's a lot. It's almost like I get overwhelmed and I'm just like do and I just keep reading, but it doesn't like penetrate all the way. So this time around, I feel like now I have an even greater grasp on the world itself, and I'm understanding like where things are and where people are, and like the maps like make a lot more sense to me, and how things are interconnected make a lot more sense. So if you're like me and you have a hard time like grasping that type of stuff, I think rereading is a great way to go back. I mean, give it some time. Like, don't read a series and then go right back and reread it, because I feel like that I couldn't do it that way. I would be like, oh my gosh, I think my brain is gonna just turn to mush. But now that I've had the time in between and I've read other things and I'm more familiar with her writing, I think rereading it was key. It took me longer to read, obviously, because I was annotating, and even though I know how this ends, I was still in my feels about a lot of things. Like, I was trying to let myself feel it as if I was reading it for the first time. So, like, when you're first reading it, you don't have the, you know, future view of what Feyre gets into throughout the whole rest of the series. And so the first one, you're like, ugh. Like, if you know, you know, you're just like, oh my gosh, love, so great. But it's hard to do that when you go back and reread. So I was trying to be like, okay, appreciate this for what it is in the moment. Like, love it because this adds to Feyre's story and she wouldn't be where she is without it. But it was like, whew, you know? And I just love Sarah J. Maas's female main characters. Like, she does it so well. And I found myself, of course, immediately getting giddy about Rhysand. Like, I was just like as soon as I knew he was, like, and when you're reading it the first time, you don't know it's him. And then when he shows up, you're like when I read it this time, I was like, so excited. The third book that I read this month was Silver Girl by Elin Hilderbrand. I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I talked about this one a little bit in one of my videos, I believe, and it was interesting because it felt a little different from typical Elin Hilderbrand books, or at least the ones that I've read. There wasn't a ton of like food talk, which I was sad about, and it also felt like there was a solid plot line through most of it, and then all of a sudden it just like became more of a character study of these two main characters, Meredith and Connie. They're both best friends. They were like kind of estranged for a little bit, and then like Meredith's life blew up and Connie kind of like came to the rescue. And then at like the very end, everything got wrapped up and tied up with a little bow. It was a very interesting format for the story, I guess. And like I said, my interest kind of ebbed and flowed. It felt like the certain parts were longer than they needed to be, and then other things I was like, wait, what? I do always enjoy all the twists and like mystery elements that Elin Hilderbrand throws in. That's some of my favorite parts of her books and her writing. Like, she always has a twist that I don't see coming. Meredith is our true main character, and like I said, her life like kind of blew up, and she was super easy to sympathize with and like connect to, given her situation and like her flashing back to high school. There was a lot of pieces where I was like, you know, I can see where she's coming from. This all, you know, is computing in my brain. And Connie was to a point, but then like Connie just got under my skin. She was so insecure and so like would just second guess every little thing. And I don't want to give anything away, and given her situation, like, it makes sense, but at the same time it was like, like I just wanted to like shake her. I think that the breadcrumbing throughout this book definitely is what kept me reading, because there were like little tiny things where I was like, ooh, I need to know what happens with that. So I would just keep reading, and then by the time I got to that, there was another breadcrumb where I was like, ooh, what about that? The seal part, so unnecessary, that's all I'm gonna say. And then also, fuck Freddie. Mic drop. The next book I read was Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and this one I gave 4.75 out of 5 stars. Saying that, like, I feel like I'm repeating myself. 4.75 out of 5. I ate this book up. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the entire year. I feel like I've said that several times in several videos, and it did not disappoint. It gave me everything and more. Looking back, I've got like a little bit of rosy retrospection in the sense that I'm like, why didn't I give this 5 stars? But when I was reading it, I didn't have that gut punch that I was, you know, where I feel like it's a 5-star. I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like if you read a lot, you just know when it's a 5-star read. And I didn't have that, but I enjoyed it so much, if that makes any sense. Ford and Rosie, I think, honestly, might be my new favorite Elsie Silver character couple. I think that they are just the sweetest. I love them both independently, and them together is just, like, love it. I talked about this one at length in my reading new releases video, so I won't get too crazy into it right now, but just know, like, I really enjoyed it. It reopened my eyes to, like, the billionaire trope, because I typically steer clear of that, and I'm, like, kind of open, like, dipping my toe in, you know? All the conflicts in it were super believable, which I liked. I don't like anything that feels super outlandish and is just thrown in there for no reason. And then the, like, child involvement in this book, the child that's involved in this story, I guess is a better way to say that, it was done in a really great way. And typically I don't like to read about kids in books, but this was really sweet. Okay, next book is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This was the epitome of a slow burn. Like, I don't think they even kissed until 80-70% through the book. So I didn't love that. It was cute, but honestly, I would have given this a 2-star. The only reason I did give it 3 is because at the end, there were so many twists and turns that I was like, what the F am I reading? Like, how did this go from point A to point Z in like 2 seconds? It's not smutty at all. So if you're wanting that, and I feel like, I don't know if it's just me, but I hear bodyguard trope and I'm like, ooh, that sounds smutty, or like it's going to be smutty or has the potential to be good and smutty. This is not that. I didn't feel the character, like, chemistry between the two of them really at all. I don't even know what the main characters' names are. Jack Stapleton is the guy. The girl, I have no idea. It just felt super forced between the two characters, and I didn't feel it. Like, I don't know. It just, not for me. Next book I read is The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson, and this was my second Holly Jackson book. I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I might bump it to a 4, but I'm not sure. It's definitely got a slower start than A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I remember not feeling super hooked immediately, and I talked about that in my reading new releases video as well. And it didn't have the extra element of, like, reading the logs and the evidence stuff that Pip was gathering, which I did really enjoy in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And this Reappearance of Rachel Price is a totally different premise. Like, a school project isn't involved, so there's no reason to have those things, but it was something that I liked that kind of broke up the really long, you know, paragraphs or like dialogue or whatever. I did not see the plot twist coming at the end, and that's something that I've noticed with Rachel Price's 2 books that I've read. It's like I pick up on certain pieces and I'm like, ooh, I called that, but I don't call it in its entirety. Like, I will pick up on, ooh, I bet this guy did this, and it's like, he did do that, but also he did it because of this, and this, and I didn't see any of that. Once I got to like the 75% mark of this book, I was hooked. Like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna speed read this all in one sitting because it is like got me in a chokehold, because it was just so much happening, and essentially all of the loose ends are tied up like really quickly. And I don't know, there are a lot of plot holes at the end of this, and I don't know that she's gonna make it a series. I feel like there's not really a reason to, but I felt that way with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I know a lot of other people did as well, but that one is a series, so I don't know. But there's just, and I'm not going to talk about what the plot holes are because it will probably give things away, but there's just some where it's like, I don't know. And now that I'm talking it through, I'm not going to give it 4 stars. It's definitely a 3.5 because the ending is wrapped up in a way that's so unrealistic and so, like, seriously, it just gave me the vibe almost that, like, so much thought and time was put into these characters and this storyline, and then at the end it was like, oh shit, like, I forgot about this piece. Let me just wrap it up real quick. And it made no sense to me. Like, I don't know, there just wasn't enough conflict around one of the pieces of this story, and that's why I gave it a lower score, because otherwise it definitely would have been like a 4, 4.5. Next book I read is Golden Girl by Ellen Hildebrand, and this one, after reading Silver Girl, like, just reignited me. Like, I gave this book 5 stars, and it is just the epitome of Ellen Hildebrand. I love her books so much. This one reminded me a lot of her Winter in Paradise series. So if you have read that and you really liked it, I think that this would be a good kind of like secondary option. They're not related at all, and they're not necessarily like the same thing or the same premise by any means, but they just give me similar vibes. This one does have like a mystery, mystical, paranormal kind of element to it, and I think that's why. It's almost as if Winter in Paradise and the Hotel Nantucket like had a baby, and that's what Golden Girl is. It made me cry at the end, and there's so many things. Like, Elin Hilderbrand books aren't smutty necessarily. They're not like cheesy at all. They're just good fucking books. Like, I don't know how else to put it. There's just so many dynamics and so many elements. Like, you've got families and friends and romance and like mystery, and like she just intertwine, and friendship and whatever. She intertwines everything so amazingly and so realistically and so believably. Is that a word? Believable? I don't know. Elin Hilderbrand is like one of my top 5 favorite authors of all time. She's just so good. Truly, I think this is the perfect book. Perfect book. I would change nothing about it. All of the characters are so lovable but flawed, and you're rooting for all of them, but you're also like, I don't know, it's just, it almost makes you feel like these characters become your family, and then you're like looking at them through that lens where you're reading about the stuff they do, and it might be fucked up and you might be like, oh my god, I can't believe they're doing that, but in your bones, in your soul, you're like rooting for them to get it together and you want to help them and that type of thing. Like, she really just gets you to care about the characters and the story so easily and so deeply. And it's interesting too because some of the things are reminiscent of her own life, and I was like, wait a minute, am I reading like a partial memoir am I reading a book about a memoir? Like, it's interesting because like in the book, and this isn't a spoiler, the book is about an author who's writing a book called Golden Girl. So to me, I was like, I don't know, it's like some Matrix type shit, you know? The next book I read is Funny Story by Emily Henry, and this one was just, so good. Emily Henry has done it again. This has become my new favorite Emily Henry book. Daphne and Miles are endgame, top tier couple for me. I'm just like obsessed. The banter, the slow burn, but not so much of a slow burn that like I felt like I was falling asleep. The chemistry, the family dynamics, the like just the roommate forced proximity thing. Again, a perfect book. I would change nothing about it. And I always connect so much to Emily Henry's characters outside of the romance. Like, I feel what they're going through and like their family issues or how they feel about themselves or their friends. I connect with that so deeply, and Daphne and I were like this, you know? And I, at the end, like hearing her recount things about her family and all of, like, I was sobbing. I just, and I cannot unsee it. Miles is Benny Blanco. I swear to you, I saw a couple people posting photos of like who they pictured as Benny, and mine could not be further from theirs. But I mean, come on. In the beginning, she paints a picture of him as a stoner whose room is like very hipster. He's very like fly by the seam of his pants. But I'm sorry, the pictures that people are posting of guys wearing like full crisp suits and like look like tech bros and are, you know, frat boys. That's not Miles. It's just not. It's not my Miles anyway. The 9th book I read is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, and I listened to this one on audiobook, and it is narrated by Meryl Streep, which I really enjoyed. I gave this one 4 stars. I don't know if I mentioned it, but obviously I gave Funny Story 5 stars. Because Meryl Streep narrated this, and like knowing her face, I almost felt like I was listening to her own story. Like when I'm picturing Laura, I'm picturing Meryl Streep. And it almost made the experience so much more enjoyable for me because I was able to picture people and the places and things way easier listening to it versus like seeing it on a page or on my screen. And I really like the juxtaposition of Laura's summer trying to become an actress in Tom Lake with Duke, and then the summer that she's now still in Michigan, not in Tom Lake, but with her family and her kids and like telling them about this story. Like it was a super interesting premise and format. I felt like everything was super wrapped up at the end. It was very sweet and a very like wholesome but emotional book. I will never picture Peter Duke as anyone other than Jacob Elordi. Like that is who it is 100%. And this was actually the first full audiobook that I've ever listened to. I hope I'm not making that up. But it's the one, I guess, the most memorable. I've always thought that I'm a really visual person, which I am, but at the same time, this, like I said, it just made it so much easier for me to visualize things because I almost wasn't using the brain power I needed to read. I was only using the brain power to imagine. I don't know if that makes any sense at all or if I sound like I'm like stoned out of my mind, but that is, I don't know, that's how it kind of played out for me. The last book I read is another 5-star book. Well, I just finished it today, so I'm like, is it 4.75 or is it a 5? I give it a 5 on Goodreads, whatever. This is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Now, you know, I've been through a roller coaster with Abby Jimenez. I love one of her books. One of her other books is probably one of the worst ones I've ever read in my entire life. I hated it to my core. This one, though, masterpiece. I cannot say enough good things about this. Like, this book, Emma and Justin are just like love. I felt like it was super realistic, and I think the issue that I have with a lot of Abby Jimenez books, I've read 3, the one that I didn't like, and the thing about the other 2, this one and Part of Your World. So let me back up. Part of Your World I really enjoyed. Then you have Yours Truly. That one made me want to like punch my own self in the face. And then this one, and they're all connected by the way, this one is Just for the Summer. So the Yours Truly I hated. The reason I hated it, and some of the reasons in these 2 books, Part of Your World and Just for the Summer, the things I didn't like about them are that her characters almost feel like they're making things complicated for themselves for no reason. Like their reactions just feel way too outlandish and unnecessary in times when they don't need to be. Like they just jump to conclusions so quickly, and I feel like I don't relate to that necessarily, although I feel like I do that in my personal life. What the fuck am I talking about? Honestly, probably why I don't like it is I'm like watching myself in the mirror. That's cool. We're having a therapy session, I guess. Okay. Anywho, back to what I was saying. Now I'm just like thinking about myself. For the most part, though, with this book, I did not feel that way. I felt like there were times where I was like, oh my god, they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it. Don't do it. I love this book so much. Don't mess it up. And I thought it was going to happen, but it didn't. But I think that's why it gets under my skin. Like, it just doesn't feel realistic, and it feels so complicated for no other reason. Like, Yours Truly, I'm gonna go on a rant again. The only conflict was communication, and they could have cleared it up by having one simple conversation. Just one. And with this one, I didn't feel that way, though. There were so many dynamics at play and so many things. Like, the reason that all the conflict happened in this book made perfect sense, realistic, like I said. And I think it was really awesome the way that Abby Jimenez writes her characters to really prioritize mental health. Like, that's what I feel like a lot of her books are about like mental health and bettering yourself and focusing on yourself and addressing those things and not using them as an excuse, but knowing it could be the reason why you do certain things or why you are certain ways. And it's interesting because even though you're reading fiction, you're almost like reflecting it back to yourself and being like, oh, damn, like that reminds me of me. And you kind of work through it that way. So it's almost like you're getting a dose of your like self-help book in the fiction book, which I really like. The way that she also tied in the first 2 books, the Part of Your World and Yours Truly, how those characters were tied into this story, it was like so cute. I loved it. Like when they popped up and things were happening, I was like, oh my god. First of all, I didn't realize that I was reading the 3rd book in the series. I thought this was just a standalone, but like that's my own fault. So just seeing them pop up was like super cute and super cool. Those are all the books that I read in the month of April. Now I am going to pull up my April TBR note here. Let's see. I did read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books on my TBR, and that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, six books that I didn't read. I feel like that's a pretty good ratio. And 4 of those were new releases. One of them was a reread, and then the others were just books that I had on my radar. And some of them are still on my radar. You'll see in my May TBR video. But that's everything that I read this month and what my TBR looks like at this moment. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe, all the things, everything social media wise is linked down below. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!